At some point in our lives, everyone has fantasized about winning the lottery, even those of us who never buy a ticket. Abraham Shakespeare couldn't have known that a routine trip to a gas station in 2006 would change his humble working-class life to that of a posh gated communities and luxury cars. He beat astronomical odds to become a lottery millionaire, but was it actually good luck? Within just a few years, Abraham would come to view his windfall as a curse, and he was right. So Abraham turned to someone he thought would help him reverse his increasingly ill fortune. Find out how Abraham Shakespeare went from rags to riches to robbed of his very existence. That's next. And this is Absolutely Criminal. Year-old Abraham Shakespeare must have felt lucky on November 15, 2006, when he spent his last $10 on lottery tickets at a Florida mini-mart. $10 would be pretty dear to a sometimes homeless man who spent his days working various odd jobs for minimum wage, but something told him to risk his remaining pocket money, even though the odds of a win were dismal. It turned out that one of the tickets he bought while making a food delivery with his coworker, John Ford, was a $30 million jackpot winner. Just a month previous, Abraham had been arrested because he couldn't pay his child support, but now he was a millionaire. At surface level, Shakespeare's criminal history paints his background as a dissolute youth, as he had spent some time in juvenile facilities, jail, and later prison for a handful of minor offenses, including loitering, misdemeanor assault, and failure to pay child support. But his crimes seemed to be related to poverty, and by all accounts, Abraham wasn't a violent man. He worked hard but remained in the stratum of the socioeconomic ladder. This was not his fault. With only an 8th grade education, a young Abraham had left school to help his father pick citrus fruits in the vast Florida groves. He spent his adult years working a variety of jobs to barely make a living. There were stretches of time when he was homeless. Many people with his background would envy the wealth of others, but not Shakespeare. He was uncommonly generous and saw his fortune as a way to help others. Unfortunately, those around him were not as honorable and charitable. Abraham was trusting and naive, which are not beneficial traits for a lottery winner. He wasn't a materialistic person by nature, but the leeches came out of the swamp to take advantage of the barely literate millionaire after he collected his $17 million payout. His initial acquisitions had been comparatively modest, including a second-hand Rolex and a couple of practical vehicles for himself and his girlfriend. Lifelong friend Theodore Day told authorities that Abraham didn't drink, take drugs, or gamble. In a 2007 article for The Ledger, Shakespeare stated that he wanted to buy himself and his mother new homes with his winnings, and he had already created a trust fund for his son. Sadly, greedy associates and poor financial planning would quickly decimate the windfall, and by 2008, Abraham was desperately clinging to his last million. Again, dubious luck would cross Shakespeare's path in the form of Doris Dede Moore, a would-be biographer interested in his life story. Moore initially approached Abraham with a proposal to write a book about his life, but as trust grew between them, Abraham would hire Dede to manage his waning fortune and help him build a small go-kart business. Abraham was right about the curse, but he had attributed it to the wrong source. The curse wasn't the money. It was Dede Moore. In short, Moore is a calculated grifter and pathological liar. Not only did she con Shakespeare out of his remaining loot and murder him, but she also engaged in a cruel months-long charade to make his family believe that he was traveling to various states and tropical islands. But even murderous con artists have their origins. So let's have a look at the girl who would become a lying liar who lied, stole, and murdered for profit. Doris Emma Donegan, aka Dee Dee, was born on July 23, 1972 at St. Joseph's Hospital in Riverview, Florida, to Linda and Patrick Donegan. Her childhood seemed stable and happy, with Doris enjoying cheerleading and social gatherings with her Brownie, Girl Scout, and Bible study groups. Her mother, Linda Donegan, was a certified nursing assistant, or CNA, who worked hard to provide a modest lifestyle for her daughter. But even as a teen, Dee Dee was covetous. In a 2010 interview with the Tampa Bay Tribune, Linda said that Dee Dee had been embarrassed by the cars her mother drove. When visiting her friends' houses, she insisted on being dropped off on a different block so no one would see her get out of the inelegant family ride. While Linda's recollections are bathed in the blind fondness of nostalgia, Moore's future behaviors would cast a more sinister light on those teenage quirks. Dee Dee would also become a CNA in 1991, and she would marry James Moore in the spring of 1992. The couple welcomed their son, Robert James R.J. Moore, 3 years later in 1995. They bought their first home in Hillsborough County, Florida in 2000 for around $48,000. While her mother claims that Moore had been a very caring nursing assistant in those early years, Dee Dee's record of financial schemes seems to have begun around the time of the home purchase. When Moore bought her 2000 Lincoln Navigator for $50,000, yes, the car cost more than her house, she claimed on the financing paperwork that she earned around $10,000 per month as a Nextel salesperson and an additional $30,000 per year with her Mary Kay business. Even so, it wasn't long before she defaulted on the car loan, and to avoid the repo man in 2001, she told her loan officer that her money had been stolen. Strangely, she never provided that police report, but she managed to make the January 2001 payment just in time to avoid repossession. She was also arrested that year for writing a bad check to the county tax office for $489.60. Just 6 months later, she was back in the hot seat for her Lincoln Navigator, owing $46,000 on a vehicle worth about $36,000 at the time. This time, she told the loan officer she would do anything she had to in order to keep her car. She wasn't exaggerating. 6 days later, Moore proceeded to file a false police report in which she claimed 2 Hispanic men, or 3, depending on the source, had carjacked and sexually assaulted her before leaving her tied up in a ditch. Dee Dee claimed that one of the men advised her to go blonde before the 2 took off with her Lincoln. It was one of many inventive details she provided during the police interview. She gave convincing descriptions of the men down to their jailhouse tattoos. According to Moore, they had kidnapped her from a post office while she was performing duties as a Nextel salesperson, a detail that may have been Dee Dee's undoing. While investigating Moore's alleged rape and kidnapping, the police talked to Nextel representatives and learned that the company had fired Moore recently, banning her from selling their phones and services as she was the subject of an internal fraud investigation. Prior to her alleged abduction, Moore had begun to tell people about a menacing, disgruntled employee who was threatening to kill her. She accused this person of setting a Nextel contract on fire in her yard or on her porch, depending on the source, as a warning. The threats had made her so afraid that she couldn't pay her office rent, according to her former landlords Reginald and Patricia Mobley. The Mobleys would later say that Moore's claims of being in danger during the Shakespeare murder investigation echoed her 2001 excuses for not paying rent. The couple would file an eviction case against Dee Dee and James Moore that year. Anyway, back to the carjacking. Here's what actually happened according to her accomplices. Dee Dee got help from 3 men, Michael Davis, Steve Rodella, and Clement Vanilla, to help her stop her vengeful former employee from threatening her. She paid Davis $500 to hide her Lincoln from repo agents. Rodella drove the car to Davis's property, and Vanilla drove Moore to the spot where she taped her own wrists and threw herself into the ditch. The 3 men thought they were helping her frame a guy who had been threatening her life. In the Dee Dee universe, framing a guy so that he will be arrested is the only way to stop him from harassing her. Police don't exist in her universe in the same way that her violent ex-employee doesn't exist in our universe. To top it all off, Dee also made an insurance claim on her stolen vehicle. Moore was arrested in August of 2001 for her 3 false police reports, the bounced check, and the fraudulent insurance claim. She only received a year of probation for this scheme, which may be why she didn't learn her lesson. Yes, she created a convoluted criminal conspiracy just to keep a car she couldn't afford. What is with this woman and cars? 2002 brought a series of civil lawsuits against Dee Dee and James Moore for unpaid debts, and by the end of the year, they were in bankruptcy court. Not only did they owe the landlords $3,600 for rented office space, but they had also stiffed the local radio station for more than $20,000 in unpaid advertising for Dee Dee's cell phone business, which was being investigated for fraud by the cellular company. It's quite a way to ring in the new year. It seems that Dee Dee served her probation and stayed out of trouble for the next few years, but she was involved in a car accident in 2003 that killed 2 people. It wasn't her fault, but she was driving a Hummer at the time. Cars again. Where was she getting the money for a Hummer after a bankruptcy? In 2004, the only public documents relating to Moore are for business transactions, one of which being the incorporation of American Medical Professionals, LLC. We will see this name again. Then 2006 rolls around, and Moore takes part in the start of a new business. Well, she took the money part anyway, stealing $60,000 from Jeff and Kim Potwin, who had entrusted their company payroll to Dee Dee. Instead of depositing the money into the company account, Moore put it into her own and claimed that the Potwins had given it to her as a gift. She was never prosecuted because the DA couldn't make a case. In 2007, Dee Dee was named as chairman for a new company, a nursing agency called American Medical Professionals, PEO. Apparently, Dee Dee's CNA and ostensible patient rapport were useful in her career, but not as a nurse. Maintaining the certification allowed her to form relationships with people so that she could con them out of their money. Business connections were an integral part of her gift, and Moore was excellent at earning people's trust and manipulating them. Abraham Shakespeare was ripe for the plucking when she approached him. Having read about his lottery win and subsequent trouble with freeloaders, she wasn't going to let him give away his last million, though. That cash had her name all over it, or it soon would anyway. Prior to meeting Moore, Shakespeare had been interested in starting a company called Shakespeare & Associates that would focus on real estate ventures related to affordable housing. He also had plans for a nonprofit to assist the less fortunate members of his community. These goals were certainly consistent with Abraham's personality, but his cognitive challenges meant that he needed help to realize them. In 2007, his business partners Franklin Jackson and Gregory Massey were working with attorney Cedric Lewis to make this happen. However, less than a year later, this dream would be shattered when along came a spider to weave a web of lies and suck the life out of the trusting and generous millionaire. It started out as a missing persons case. One would think that a whip-thin 6'5" dreadlocked man would be easier to track down than most people, but that might have been true if Abraham had been above ground during the search. Detective Christopher Lim had been called in to assist investigators from the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, or BCI, with possible financial crimes associated with Abraham's disappearance. At the time of this interview, December 2009, Abraham had been reported missing by his cousin, Cedric Edom. Edom had not seen Shakespeare since April and had only received sporadic vague text messages after that from Shakespeare's phone. Detective Lynn already knew that Moore had gained complete control of Abraham's assets, which included the house on Red Hawk Bend Drive, a $1 million property in a gated community. The officers assigned to Shakespeare's missing person case had already unearthed various legal and business documents that showed transfers of money and property to Moore under the auspices of American Medical Professionals, which under Moore's direction was a cover for her fraud schemes before meeting Shakespeare. During her first interview, Moore told Detective Lynn that she was a wealthy business owner and that American Medical Professionals has been successful enough to allow her to buy the Red Hawk property from Abraham with cash that she had set aside. Although Dee Dee was unable to tell Lynn how much she had profited from the business, why did Dee Dee have a durable power of attorney to access all of Shakespeare's assets? Well, according to her, Abraham was planning to travel extensively, and he needed her to carry out business transactions in his absence. Moore had made an asset purchase agreement, PGA, with Shakespeare to help him collect debts from people who had defaulted on personal loans. This was a large part of why Abraham couldn't have nice things despite being a multimillionaire. He had helped out so many people in his community by loaning them money when the banks wouldn't, and this left him with less money for himself and a bunch of dishonored promissory notes. Moore purchased the debt from Abraham via the PGA and took over debt collections. Since Dee Dee was white and the community she would be working with was mostly African Americans, Shakespeare felt that she would have difficulty collecting the money. Abraham hired his longtime friend Judith Haggins as a collection agent to assist Moore and as a personal driver for his mother, Elizabeth Walker. Haggins was granted power of attorney of record, POA, on April 3, 2009, so she could legally collect money for Abraham. Her job was to collect the debts, ranging from $500 to $2,000 monthly, and then give the money to Dee Dee Moore. Judith didn't know what Moore did with the cash. In exchange for her services, Moore would give Haggins $500 a month in gas money or pay bills for her. The last time Judith had seen Abraham was at the April meeting with a notary to give her the POA. Moore, Shakespeare, Joe Lewis, and Austin Ambrose, the notary, had attended this meeting. Judith was very close to Abraham, having been friends with him for 25 years, and she provided some important background information for the case. Judith described Shakespeare as slightly intellectually challenged, using words like slow to describe him. While records may show that he may have made it to 8th grade, in reality he was functionally illiterate. He could sign his own name to documents, but he was unable to read or write. Judith recounted that he would ask her and others to read and write text messages for him. When asked how he could have been sending texts over the previous months, Judith speculated that he would have asked someone else to send them. This was what she thought was happening. Judith had only heard from Shakespeare via text since the April meeting, and the content of the messages was mostly praise of Moore and gratitude toward Haggins. She had not talked to him by phone or seen him in person. The last text was from August of 2009, when Abraham informed her that he had asked Cedric Edom to pass on a birthday card to his mother. Judith replied to him to verify that Elizabeth had received the card and to tell him that his mother was worried and missed him. The problem with this story was that Moore was the only other person to verify that Abraham had given the card to Cedric. Judith asked Cedric about the meeting, believing he had seen Shakespeare and wanting to know how he was doing, but Cedric denied being involved or seeing his cousin. This inconsistency had to have been suspicious to both parties, but it was Cedric Edom who would later report Shakespeare as a missing person in November 2009. Judith told investigators about another important meeting that took place in October of 2008, several months before the POA appointment and the last time she saw Abraham alive. This was the ill-fated meeting between Dee Dee and Abraham. According to Judith, a woman named Barbara Jackson met up with Abraham and Judith at a Red Lobster, and Dee Dee was with Jackson. Judith understood that Moore wanted to write a book about Shakespeare's rags to riches life story. She felt like the relationship between Moore and Shakespeare took off quickly from that meeting. There is a problem with this account, however, because Jackson would claim that she introduced the two in November or December of 2008 at Shakespeare's home. So how did Barbara Jackson become acquainted with Dee Dee Moore? According to a Times article from December 13th of 2009, Jackson, the realtor who had sold the Red Hawk Drive house to Abraham, had met Moore at a business engagement in Kissimmee in November of 2008. Dee had turned on her charm as she rolled up to Barbara in her wheelchair to chat, and the discussion turned to Abraham Shakespeare. Jackson had been impressed by Abraham's charitable nature and lack of materialism. While her intentions were likely benign, she had no idea who she was talking to. Moore had introduced herself as a writer, and their discussion about this generous, unassuming man had inspired her to write his life story. According to Barbara, she set up the first meeting between Moore and Shakespeare at his house 2 weeks after meeting her at the Kissimmee Conference. Moore arrived at Red Hawk Drive with perfect mobility, hopping out of her Hummer wearing stilettos. Dee Dee, who had supposedly been immobile from a car accident, cars again, claimed that scuba therapy had mended her injuries. How curious. While there are conflicting accounts about the cursed introduction, we know that Moore had slithered her way into Shakespeare's life in the latter part of 2008, claiming to be a writer interested in his life story. Well, Dee Dee is fond of telling stories, and we know this from her own changing accounts of Abraham's demise. While we can't accept any of Moore's claims as credible, we do know from close friends and family that Abraham was last seen alive in April of 2009. According to Moore, he wanted to travel to get away from the freeloaders and distress for a few months, but his friend Theodore Day had told investigators that Abraham had mentioned possibly moving households with no hard dates mentioned. Whether he really had intentions to travel is up for debate. Regardless, he needed others to act as his agents due to his limited cognitive skills, and the agents had to be trusted people. Unfortunately, Abraham was more trusting than most, and Dee Dee's slick grifting had fooled people with more education and worldly experience than him. Moore managed to gain control over Shakespeare's assets between December of 2008 and April of 2009, and with that final POA sealing Abraham's fate, she quickly removed Abraham's name from his bank accounts and business holdings, and also grabbed his phone to send texts to his business associates and closest family members. Moore carefully engineered communications with anyone who would miss Abraham by either forging his name on documents, passing along verbal messages, or texting from his phone. She even tried to get someone to impersonate Abraham on the phone. That could have worked for the electric company, but Dee Dee tried this particular scam on Abraham's mother, Elizabeth Walker. While dining out with Moore on December 27, 2009, Ms. Walker received a phone call from a person who was trying to sound like Abraham. Fake Shakespeare told her he was not going to talk to police or family because there was a warrant out for his arrest. Dee Dee was naturally excited about the call, assuring Elizabeth that Abraham was alive and now the whole investigation could be called off. Hallelujah! Unfortunately, the Christmas miracle was another fraud that only served to make Moore even more suspicious to Elizabeth and the police. Calls from fake Shakespeare were traced to a prepaid number belonging to Greg Smith, who had only talked to one other person using that number. You guessed it. Smith was a friend of Shakespeare's, an alleged accomplice of Moore's, and eventually an informant for the police investigating Moore. He wasn't involved in the murder, but he helped Moore afterwards and knew where she had buried Abraham. Inevitably, Moore's hubris was her own undoing, and witnesses would reveal that she hadn't been as convincing as she believed. Elizabeth Walker had already questioned Moore before the dinner miracle. She had been rejecting calls from an unknown number around Christmas time, and Dee showed up at her house one day advising her to answer the calls. It just so happened that the number rang again while Dee Dee was at the house. And what do you know? It was some guy claiming that Shakespeare would be calling her soon from a specific number. Of course, it was Greg Smith setting up the fake Shakespeare call. Detectives Wallace and Clark interviewed Gregory Massey, a former neighbor and associate of Abraham Shakespeare, regarding texts he had received from the missing millionaire. Massey had helped Shakespeare with his loan collections before Moore came into the picture and pushed him out of it. While Massey claims that there was no bad blood between the men, the last time he saw Shakespeare was in early April, when Abraham tried to get him to sign a quitclaim deed over to him as repayment for an alleged loan. Massey was not in agreement over the terms or that he even owed money to Shakespeare, so he refused to sign the paperwork. After that, Massey only received texts from Abraham's phone. Massey knew that Shakespeare was illiterate, so he was suspicious of the texts, and he sent messages back with questions that only Abraham could answer. Those texts were ignored. Moore had also been calling him about the police investigation, trying to find out what Massey was telling them. As we bring this chilling tale of deceit and betrayal to a close, we hope that Abraham Shakespeare's story serves as a reminder that evil lurks everywhere amidst the promise of newfound wealth. Next time you play the lottery, try to imagine how your life would change. Now imagine how it would end. If you've been captivated by this harrowing journey into the heart of darkness, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling stories that will leave you questioning the very fabric of humanity. Until next time, let the darkness come alive.